All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. It's time for the Malzberg panel, and joining us today, retired Major General in the U.S. Army, founder of Stand Up America, Major General Paul E. Vallely is back with us, and LIGNET senior analyst Lisa Ruth. And welcome to both of you as the police searching the homes now of the Paris terrorists and still looking for the two. And we had a policewoman shot and killed today in what they're calling a terrorist attack in France. Let me start with you, General. Let's talk about who these brothers are. What do we know about who they are?
Well, there's several things we know. They've been living in these Islamic mini-states, if we want to call it that, in the suburbs of Paris. We understand now they have connections to Al-Qaeda, even perhaps being part of ISIS in Iraq and Syria for the senior one. So from that standpoint, they've been trained probably overseas, somewhere in the areas controlled by Al-Qaeda or ISIS, returned. And they've been planning this operation, as far as we know, probably for a year now, against the newspaper, the magazine. So this is what we're looking at now. But these controlled, Sharia-controlled, basically, many states within France, they actually ruled themselves, and the city officials will do nothing about it, or have not done anything about it. They've let this grow in London, they've let it grow out in the suburbs there, as well as in Sweden, and particularly in Holland. And I'm not sure it's reversible at this time until the politicians make a decision to do so.
Yeah, Lisa, let's talk about that. But first, I want to talk about this younger brother, the 32-year-old one, Sharif. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison back in 2008 for being part of a jihadist recruitment ring in Paris that sent fighters to join the conflict in Iraq. I mean, I know he was let out of jail early after a year and a half of a 3-year sentence, but you know, I just think that all countries, especially you know, in Western Europe, have to reevaluate how they treat people who go to these lengths. I mean, what did they think? He was rehabilitated?
Yeah, you know, to me, I've heard a lot about this as a security failure, and really this is flat out an intelligence failure. We can't deploy security resources to follow these people around all the time, but we should know things like this, and they should be monitored. This is someone who should have been considered a very high target if he was actually in jail, and as we know, while in jail, we're now hearing he was still talking to jihadists while he was there. As you said, it wasn't that he reformed while he was there. In fact, they know that he created more ties to other jihadist groups while he was there. I also heard from a colleague in the area in France this morning that the police were aware that he was continuing to try to recruit people to Iraq and Syria and potentially Yemen. This is the worst example of what's wrong with intelligence and why we so desperately need it. Security is after the fact. We need the intelligence ahead of time.
Right, and as the general pointed out, that the police in these heavily Muslim areas basically, in many instances, don't do much of anything as far as you know, trying to enforce the law. So if you're not even going to do that, then you know, then how are you going to take it up a notch when it comes to intelligence and reining in someone like him for doing what he's doing?
Absolutely. The issue here is monitoring and getting better sources, human sources. You've got to be able to provide intelligence to the decision makers, to the police, and to respond. Again, the magazine was guarded. We know that there were people there, although they didn't have weapons, which, you know, doesn't really help all that much. On the other hand, there were security forces there. Unless you can develop resources, develop sources to provide information, you're always going to be cleaning up after the fact. You're not going to be prepared, and you've got to be proactive. It's the same thing in France that it is in the United States.
Right, and General, in the last segment here, well, you know, when we come back, I want to talk about it. I want to talk about how the French military forces deployed and relocated near Paris after this attack, and what that signifies, and does it leave it vulnerable in other areas, and is this something that, you know, other terrorist groups could look at and say, this is how they're going to react. So we'll come back with part 2 of the panel with Lisa Ruth, and we'll start with General Vallely when we return right here on the Steve Malzberg Show, only on Newsmax Television.
This is a terrorist attack. There is no doubt about that. We are threatened because we are a country of freedom. And because we are a country of freedom, we will punish the aggressors. We will face the threats. No one can possibly think that they can act here in France contrary to the principles of the Republic.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're back with the Malzberg panel. General Paul E. Vallely and senior analyst at LIGNET, Lisa Ruth. Okay, let's start with you, General. The French military moved around quite a bit after the attack in Paris. Talk about what they did, and is that something that you would expect?
Steve, yes, it is something you would expect from the French forces over there to reposition some of their airborne forces out of southern France near Pau, France, as well as their special operations and even some of the French police forces to go around in those suburbs, at least on the outskirts now, because remember, there's still no-go zones. And what Lisa said, intelligence, but it's more than that. It's political correctness, and it's the multiculturalism that has not worked over there. So when these forces go in, they're very careful again, because the officials are watching, don't want them to infringe on these no-go zones in Sharia law and incite more of the Muslim radical activity. But they're primarily going north of Paris because that's where a lot of the threats are coming from, and where the two remaining suspects, the brothers, evidently are heading, from what we understand, to Belgium and maybe one of the no-go zones up there.
Well, what about it, Lisa? Smart move? That's the right thing to do?
You almost have to. Again, unfortunately, what you had mentioned on the lead-in before, it certainly does provide information to these terrorists about how we in the West respond to something like that. On the other hand, you can't not respond. And for these terrorists, a year of planning ahead of time, they probably knew what was going to happen after the fact anyway. The fact that they've gotten away this far. We also know that many of these terrorists aren't concerned with getting away. A suicide bombing is a completely acceptable outcome for them. So it's not as big a deal, but I do think the military had to respond. They have to take these actions. It's important for them at this point to try to make France feel secure.
You know, Lisa, yesterday we thought that these people were very sophisticated, had it all figured out, totally almost, at least I did. We saw, you know, militarily speaking, you know, they knew how to shoot, they knew how to act, they didn't panic, they shot the cop in the head and they walked back to the car, the whole thing. And then we find out one of the brothers leaves his ID on the seat of the car. We think back to the sneaker that fell out. Now they may have robbed a gas station, they're on the run. So maybe they weren't as suave and sophisticated as we think.
Maybe not. On the other hand, as the general can attest, there's a big difference between training and action. And it looks like, at least initially, again, speaking to colleagues over there, the mistake they made was leaving the ID behind. That was the first thing. And now after the fact, it does seem that they're panicking a little bit. And some of this may be because once things are not going the way they're planned, you start to see things fall apart. And it's not all that surprising to see something like this. You can be trained all you want, but in the real world, it's a whole different ballgame.
Right. General, back to your point of the police and the communities, is it possible that these brothers could be, you know, hidden away by some in the community?
Oh, absolutely. And that's where they go back to their lair, where they have that kind of protection and security. But, you know, again, when you don't have a policing of those areas, and as Elisa pointed out, maybe you don't have good intelligence within those no-go zones, then it's hard to have anybody on the ground that can give you that information. That's why covert operations, covert intelligence people are absolutely critical in this combat now. This is not a war on terror anymore, Steve, as I said. This is combat, and it's combat against radical Muslims and radical Islam, and we have got to take it seriously.
All right, retired Major General Paul E. Vallely, and the founder of Stand Up America, and senior analyst at LIGNET, Lisa Ruth. Thank you both. Very great debate. Appreciate your information. Folks, when we come back, we're going to do the first of our Gimme Fives for today. And we're going to take a look at how some in the media have responded to what took place yesterday. Make sure you watch. It's next.